Welcome back to 8 Cubes, and welcome back to Lamby series, who is back in the co-host chair as we talk about the upcoming card of Marvel Snap's Starbrand, a 3/10 with an ongoing ability that gives your opponent +3 power in the locations Starbrand is not on. 3/10, or more specifically, a 3 that can discount Scar, is a very notable stat line in Marvel Snap recently. What do you think this card will be able to do in terms of reviving the Scar archetype, Lamby?
Right, so I definitely think that a 310 is insane and definitely goes in that Scar deck, right? Because it's just one of those things that obviously is meant to discount a Scar. But of course, the downside is that there's a good chance that it's actually just a 3/4 because you give your opponent 3 power on the other locations. But at the end of the day, Marvel Snap is a game about winning 2 and not all locations. So it's kind of like you play a 310 here, you are willingly saying that you might lose one of the other locations that you give power to. So it's actually kind of fine. I think this is a good card. I don't know if this actually revives the Scar deck, right? Because it's been nerfed so much already, But the funny thing is that when I first saw this card, I was like, okay, fine, play it in the Scar deck. But 310 coming out of nowhere on the final turn, like you can just slam it and then it just Omega increases the power output of that lane that you want to win, right? So that's what it has going for it. But personally, I don't think it actually just straight up revives the Scar deck.
It's a card that looks a little weird to me because I feel like when I look at it, I'm like, this is probably like fine to good, but I'm thinking about it a lot in the context of just playing it on 3. And that other playline you mentioned of like playing it late is really relevant because one of the major upsides of not having an expensive cost is flexibility. You can play this on turn 5 with a 2-drop, right? You can play this on turn 6 with a 3-drop. And notably, Scar right now, if you have 2 10s on the board, will cost 3. So there's a world where you do 10, 10, Scar, and this on the final turn of the game. This is also a card that is the single most goated Iron Patriot follow-up in the entire game right now.
Yeah.
Like, he's the guy. Like, this is the Iron Patriot guy. So there is that aspect of it, too, where it's like, if people are playing this, suddenly we have, like, a real follow-up to run Iron Patriot in your Surtur deck, right? Like, we did not have a good 3 to go with Iron Patriot with Surtur in the deck, especially when Surtur was like a 3/4. He's been all over the place recently. But even at a 3/5, it's like, that's pretty okay, but it's not necessarily going to win it. Now we have a 3/5 and a 3/10. And suddenly, like, that is a very valid case for being an Iron Patriot deck that we didn't necessarily have before. There is a lot that this card can do as a 3/10 in that context that I think is very unique and very interesting. And weirdly, I'm not going to say he punishes your opponent for Shang-Chiing him, but they are losing points if they Shang-Chi him. It's like, oh, okay, I'm going to get rid of the big guy. It's like, well, you're also losing some points on the other lanes, and that kind of matters if you're playing a 4/3 on the final turn of the game. And so the more I talk about this card, the more I think about the ways in which I can apply this card, the more I come away from it thinking like this guy has a real shot. Like, I think this card could be a real legitimate threat in the current metagame.
Yeah, just to add one last point, which I think, firstly, this card's flexibility is, as much as I only kind of realized it the more we talk about it as well. But I think this card's flexibility is a bit like how in the past, we had the whole Shuri Sauron deck where you had a 1 mana, 1/7 Ebony Maw that could go anywhere on the final turn. This one feels very like that, like you could just split the power and it's a lot on the final turn. Having the agency to choose where you want to lose and where you want to go +10, I think it's quite insane. And yeah, I think the more we talk about it, the more I feel like this card could do some good work.
I would be over the moon if this guy was able to bring Sauron back. I don't know if that'll happen until Sauron's like a 3/5 or whatever, but I would be over the moon. Agamotto is the Season Pass card, and we're probably going to be talking about him a lot more because he is a card that is so complex and so weird and so odd that I find it hard to believe that we've solved him after only a few days with him. Now, this is a bit of a complex topic because I know people like me to read out the cards, so I'm going to read out Agamotto from memory. Agamotto is a 5/10 that shuffles 4 Ancient Arcana into the deck. The Ancient Arcana are effectively effectively spells or skills or whatever it is they're calling these cards that do not have power and banish themselves as part of their effect. The first one is Temporal Manipulation. It gives Agamotto +3 power and puts him into your hand. Notably, this also works if you have discarded or destroyed Agamotto. You can bring him back from those piles with Temporal Manipulation. There is also at 2 Winds of Watum, a 2-cost spell that gives -5 to a card at the location you play it and moves it 1 location to the right. At 3, there is Bolts of Balthak that gives +4 energy on the next turn. And at 4, there is Images of Icon, which changes every card at the location you play it to your strongest card at that location. Typically, when you build an Agamotto deck, you build it around Images of Icon, or at least to facilitate good Images of Icon. So a couple of packages have sort of sprung up around Agamotto. Agamotto, Sam Wilson, Agamotto Gwenpool, Agamotto Galacta, Agamotto King Atri. And the ethos here is that when you're building around Images of Icon, you want to be playing images on 5, meaning that you usually want to be playing it on a 4-drop. Those 2 G ladies are the strongest 4-drops to be playing it on. King Atri is a body, because you need bodies on the board in order to profitably images. Sam Wilson is a body. Both of them come attached to another card. And so that's typically like what we're seeing these sort of decks do in the early days of Agamotto.
Yeah, so this card... Okay, so basically recently I've been obviously playing a little bit less Marvel Snap, but ever since this card got released, my DMs have been filled with Lamby. This is such a card that you would like. This is your card.
It is.
And the funny thing is, it really is, because I love Thanos, I love Arishem, down to Nico Minoru. I love Nico Minoru as well. So what these cards do is, all these cards give you a lot of options, and Agamotto is, I think, one of the ones that gives you the most options in terms of deck building. And I want to agree with KM as well. Like, it's only been a few days since it's released, right? There's no way we completely solved the card, you know that. I mean, like, there's definitely some like better decks, versions of the decks that have been out right now, like the one that abuses the 2 G ladies with the Images of Icon. Oh, by the way, you got all the cards correct, and the text set, you got it all correct. Yep. So Images of Icon to me is like one of the strongest cards in the deck. I think comparatively to Bolts of, I can't really say this without laughing, but Bolts of Balthak.
You can't do it. Yeah, it's hard to do.
It's hard, man, for not obvious reasons, or maybe obvious. But Bolts of Balthak is just like super ramp, right? Like 3 mana, gain 4 energy. It's just straight up +1 energy, you know? So it's just all upside when you play this card. So these 2 cards are probably the strongest ones to obviously build around Images of Icon, and then you ramp with Bolts of Balthak. Yeah, so my question right now is that with the other 2 cards, right, which one do you think, like, which one do you and you guys think that is the worst spell arcana? Is it the 1 or the 2? Because I'm pretty sure both of them are like bad in different situations.
The funny thing is, I think if you ask the average Marvel Snap person, like community member, they'd say that the Winds of Watum is the most broken one. And I don't think that's even close to true. Like, but that's the one that's like the numbers on it are like the most like obviously strong, right? Like all these other spells like sort of require something of you. Like they want something, they have like fail cases and success cases. Where like Bolts is basically
how does Bolts of Balthak fail? Isn't just straight up?
You just don't have enough stuff to like follow it up. So like the fail case for Bolts is like you have a bunch of energy and just like no cards, and that can happen. Yeah. That really can happen, especially the way Agamotto decks tend to get built because they need like the small guys for images, right? So you have this like actual fail case for Bolts. You have this fail case for images, which is you just don't have the small guys. Your hands was all spells, and you just can't do anything with it. And there's no fail case for wins. And I think that means that a lot of people just look at it and they're like, that one's really too strong. It's just got, like, his numbers are too good. I don't know if it is. Like, I see people saying, like, oh, it could be -4. And it's like, yeah, it probably could. But, like, does it have to be? Like, it could be. It could be without meaningfully impacting Agamotto as a card. But, like, it would very clearly, I think, if you put it at -4, be the worst of the spells. By a lot. I'm not convinced it's not already. It's a very good card, don't get me wrong. But, like, you're not building around that. You're not building around the 1 and the 2. You're building around the 3 and the 4. When you make an Agamotto deck, and we'll talk about this in the next segment a little bit, those are not considerations. Those are basically free rolls. So there is something to be said for that. So I talked a little bit about the brief overview of building Agamotto, but there's like kind of a lineage here that's worth talking about. Because when he first came out, the thought process was Put him in every mid-range deck, and you will gain verticality to combat Hela. And that is true. Like, just even using him into images, right, will get you, like, you know, up to 39 points in a lane. Like, that's the kind of thing where it's like, my mid-range deck previously had no way to get to 39 points in a lane. Now I can beat a Hela lane with the Infinite in it some of the time, right? Like, that's the kind of thing that mid-range decks didn't have access to. But as the metagame developed, it became clear, at least to me, that it's like, that's probably not the right way to use Agamotto. He looks like a card that is like Iron Patriot, I go in everything, I'm incredibly splashable. But I think he's actually closer to like an Agent Venom or a Surtur card, where once we figure out what the deck for the guy is, people are just going to play that deck instead of putting him in everything, right? And that, I think, is a really interesting proposition because he's a powerful card where all of his spells are balanced by the fact that they are not bodies. They do not stay on the board like Thanos stones. There's no way to really make them asymmetric. But making them asymmetric is something locations can do some of the time. And I think that's one of the things that I overlooked. When I looked at this card, I was like, I don't see a way to make him asymmetric. But there's a lot of locations that make him asymmetric. For example, if you have a unit on a location that you otherwise cannot necessarily play onto, you like an Altar of Death or a Death's Domain or whatever, and your opponent is also able to get stuff there. Well, what you can do is you can move Sam's shield over there, and then you can Images of Icon, and then suddenly you'll have a lot of points on that location. Like, there are a bunch of things to say, like, you can't play whatever here, that the spells can help you get around in ways that are tricky and weird and fun. But ultimately, what Agamotto wants first is bodies on the board, good things to images. Those are the things that he wants. The second thing that he wants is good stuff in hand, so you can Bolts of Balthak. And that really sort of brings us to the Images Gwenpool line, which is becoming a pretty core thing in Agamotto decks because it fits both of those. It makes the stuff in your hand stronger, and it allows you to just like do something stupid with images. The tension, I think, in most Agamotto decks is on turn 5. Am I playing bolts? Am I playing images? Am I playing Agamotto? That's usually where the tension is. So you're asking an Agamotto deck to not have valuable early scalers a lot of the time because you're imaging stuff, right? So he's a little bit worse in Scream than you think. He's a little bit better in King Atri stuff than you think. And so that's sort of where I'm at with the card. It's a very confusing card that I think people think is a lot more splashable than it is.
Yeah, so I think when you say he's like not as splashable as people think, I feel like that's with reference to like the best possible version of Agamotto,
Yes.
right? Because I think like if you just play an Agamotto deck and just build it however you want, whatever mid-range shell, it will work. But I do also agree that like I don't think that's the best mileage you can get out of the card, you know? Like I think so far what we've seen with the whole Gwenpool and Galacta one, that seems like the current best way to get mileage out of the 4 and the 3 Arcanas, you know, like the way to get the most points on the board. Also, we need to remember that Bolts of Balthak it's effectively just you are gaining 1 mana. It's not like you're gaining a lot of mana. It's just 1 mana because you spend 3 and then you gain 4, which is obviously an upside. But you need to remember that like it's not like for you to it's not for you to play like too many big cards. You know, like just looking at Bolts of Balthak, you think like, oh, I can play a lot of big cards in my deck. But actually, it's just like 1 mana bonus. You know, so it's actually not something for you to like go spamming 6s and 5s and 6s. So I don't think that's the direction that you should build the deck. I like what we have right now, where we are building towards like good 3s and mainly good 4s. You know, and Images of Icon is just there to duplicate like a good 4. But yeah, I really think that this once we actually figure out what is the best possible version of Agamotto, everyone will play that version because it will probably have the highest like abuse factor for the Agamotto cards.
Moving on to Eson, a card I feel fairly comfortable calling overrated. And I think that a lot of that is due to a variety of factors. There's like a bunch of different things that I think contributed to people perceiving Eson as this busted card. I don't really see a meaningful difference in terms of power level between something like Red Wing and something like Eson, and the narrative in the community could not be more different around those two cards. And I think, you know, the fact that I'm seeing people say on Twitter, like, you know, Eson is so strong it has to be nerfed. Like, I think that is well out of the realm of consideration, personally. And I think that, like, this is a card that when I look at the actual stats, in, like, top 50% infinite, it's got an under 48% win rate. It's got a negative cube rate. This card, I cannot see any evidence for it being good. Whenever I try to play it, it does not feel like an actual good card. I think it is exciting. I think it is compelling. I think it is unique. I think it is potentially powerful. It has genuine upside attached to it. It's a good value proposition. It's a 6/10 that can be much bigger than a 6/10. It's really cool. There's really good stuff that it can do. But it is the furthest thing from broken, and I kind of wonder if the reason people think it's broken is just because it's a big number on the final turn of the game. And, like, I have been wrong about how valuable big numbers on the final turn of the game are before, but I don't think I'm wrong about this, because the context for this is a metagame that, like, nice Eson, I just Agamotto images, then it's bigger kind of thing. Nice Eson, I just played Hela and it's bigger kind of thing, where it's just like, this is not the time for this card. At the very least, I can say that. A lot of people are calling it busted. I think it's comprehensive that it's not busted, because it's definitely not busted right now. I don't even know if it's going to be busted in a metagame that is favorable to it. It goes a certain amount of big, and there's a lot of stuff in this metagame that goes way bigger than him.
Yeah, so the thing about Eson is the card, like you said, right? It looks like it's good, like a lot of stats on the final turn, blah blah blah. This card feels like its best use case would be in Arishem, where it's actually playable on turn 5, right? So you sort of maybe get 2 turns of mileage from like the free card that you put onto the board. But the problem is also, then again, if this is already on the board on turn 5, it gets shanked, so you don't get the second proc of it, you know.
Yep.
And one thing that you pointed out to me before this, and I realized I think it makes a lot of sense, and why I initially thought Eson would be good and maybe now it's not, is it looks like it gets you free Agamotto spells as well. But the problem with that is it's random, right? So a lot of what Agamotto wants to do is like intentionally use the icon, what's it called again? Yeah, the icon spell. I call it the icon spell. They intentionally want to use the icon spell on like a target that it really wants to duplicate. And with Eson, it's just completely random. So it doesn't really do too well in the whole like Agamotto department as well. So yeah, I can't really see this being as a threat in Arishem, but outside of that, doesn't seem like it's as flexible or like as overpowered as like a lot of people would initially think.
I really wanted to believe in this card. I want to be clear, like, I'm not just hating for the sake of hating. I have this card Spotlight variant because I thought it was awesome. Like, I really wanted this card to be good. I still really want this card to be good. I would love nothing more than to be wrong about what I'm saying right now, because I think he is cool. I think he is super, super cool and awesome. I just don't think the power is there for him, and I think this might be the one card ever where them taking it to 6/10 actually does make it worse. Like, normally there is no such thing as a card like that, but because Agamotto came out, everyone is playing Shang-Chi because he's a 5/10, right? And so this guy who wants to be played on turn 5, who wants to be ramped out into stuff like that, is now eminently vulnerable to the Shang-Chi.
Yeah, I think the funny thing is this card, like you said, is literally way better as a 6/9, right? Because if you play it on turn 5, there's like potentially no counterplay to this, and then you always get the mileage of the second drop from your hand, you know, if you play on turn 5 in Arishem. So yeah, 6/10 is actually like a burden here.
I think 6/10 might be a burden, but like 6/11 would then like go the other way. Where it's like, then suddenly it's like, now I'm actually just happy playing this on 6, right? Like, just like, this is just a really big guy on 6. I'm just chill with it, right? But like 6/10 is like the unhappy medium. Speaking of unhappy, let's talk a little bit about Hela, who is a monstrously powerful deck that has awkward knock-on effects on the metagame. Now, luckily for me and everyone else who enjoys playing normal Marvel Snap, I think that Hela has sort of ended up in a position where it's not like she's bad, she's just unexciting. And 2 really exciting cards just released, so we're in like a bit of a fake metagame right now, where everyone is playing Agamotto that probably loses to Hela. Like, I think Agamotto decks have a much better shot against Hela than basically any previous mid-range deck did. It is no longer free when you see a Sam Wilson hit the board and you discard a Black Cat. You can no longer just like, oh, I'm snapping, I win this game, right? Like, it just happens, right? But it is still not a great matchup for the non-Hela gamers out there. And I think right now, Hela is sort of dodging being hated because everyone is playing Agamotto, even the people that were normally playing Hela, because he's such an exciting and cool card. His play rate is like over 50%. This is a really exciting card that is sort of creating a fake metagame right now. All of that is to say that I think that over a long enough period of time, Hela ends up still being a pretty large problem here. And frankly, that if I'm second dinner, I'm very grateful that she didn't stifle the development of Agamotto decks in the cradle. Like, I'm grateful that Agamotto was exciting enough to get people to play him instead of just trying to beat him. Because a lot of the time when a new card comes out, people just play the counter instead. And we saw that basically all of last month.
Yeah, so the thing about Hela is that at the end of the day, it's still a very simple deck with a lot of points, right? And I think one of the reasons why it's not just, let's just continue to play Hela and then not play Agamotto is because Agamotto's excitement factor is through the roof. Like this card is not just new, it's just new and also varied in the ways you can build it. It's not solved yet, and it's also really, really good, like it's a lot of points. Like I wouldn't say it's always more points than Hela, but it can be potentially more points than Hela. So people picked up on the fact that it doesn't auto lose to Hela and it's new, so obviously we're gonna play the new thing, But I'll be very frank, I think maybe give it a bit more time. Like once the Agamotto thing gets a bit solved, and people are like, all right, I don't want to use too much brain cells. Let's just play the easy win deck. Hela will probably go back up there again, like it's not really down anyway. It's just like less exciting than the Agamotto card that can see play right now.
We're coming to the end of Sanctum Showdown. I think it's probably a good time to take a look back at Sanctum and I guess sort of stack rank it compared to the other modes that we've had. Now, my experience in Sanctum was heavily biased by the fact that I basically didn't have to play it in order to get the rewards. I have, at the time of recording, I currently have 47 scrolls. I had 29 when I stopped playing, and they just gave me 18 more. I don't plan on using any of those 47 scrolls. So, to me, one of the things that always happens in game modes is they'll make a game mode and then they'll change something about the base game of Marvel Snap. And I love the base game of Marvel Snap. The base game of Marvel Snap is the draw to me. I think a lot of Marvel Snap's strength is that it is just one big button that says play the best damn card game there is. And so whenever they do a game mode, it almost feels to me like I am forced to play the game mode in order to acquire these cards on time. And I have to do something that I don't want to do. So game modes to me, I'll just say it right out, they often feel like a chore, something that I have to do. Do you have that same experience, or are you like slightly more normal than I am?
Honestly, I think it's so weird, right? Like in the past, the game modes were a little bit difficult to get said cards, right? Can you remember Deadpool's Dinah and Cassandra Nova? That one was a bit of a headache. This one is like absurdly easy to get the cards correct. So it's very weird because like no one is ever really happy. If it's too difficult, you complain. If it's too free, then they'll just be like, oh, the game mode is unplayable because like there's nothing to play for. But the thing is, well, like how do you make everybody happy, But I think one thing I want to really talk about, because you touched on this, which is you said that Marvel Snap is probably one of the best card games out there right now. And the funny thing is, after playing so many card games, I think that Marvel Snap is really literally one of the best card games out there right now, because it's the uniqueness factor of how you play Marvel Snap is there's no other card game that's doing
There's
it.
nothing like it. It's crazy.
There's nothing like it, Like I always find myself coming back to get myself updated and learning about like everything that's happening in Marvel Snap, because there is really no card game out there that does the mechanics that it does at the current time of recording, obviously. So I think that with what Marvel Snap did, with the first mover advantage it has over everything in the field, like Marvel Snap probably will be here for a long time with the way that it's like, like we keep talking about, right, this game mode is not great, that game mode is not great, but like they've had such a head start. Like they definitely have a lot of time to improve and get to that pivotal point where it's completely unfathomably the best card game out there.
Yeah, I think like a lot of gaming discourse gets sort of dragged in weird directions by people with agendas, but like ultimately when you get down to it, like great games sell. When a game is great, people play it. And Marvel Snap is, in my opinion, the best card game to be released in the last 5 years, and maybe one of the best card games to be released ever. Like, it's just really good.
Yeah, it's because it's also different, right? Because
Yeah.
every other card games system, to be completely frank, every other card game system just followed Hearthstone. Because Hearthstone was the gold standard of card games, right? I mean, Ben Brode did it. And then now Ben Brode came to Marvel Snap to do a new Ben Brode 2.0 game. And obviously, since he was the first then, he's gonna be the first here as well, right? I think he kind of knew that like the new innovation style of how Marvel Snap plays will be more appealing, and clearly it's working.
It's a hell of a resume, but like in the context of the game modes. So for me, I feel like Sanctum was the best game mode because it is the one I had to do the least gaming in. Like,
True.
Sanctum is the one.
But it's subjective as well, right? Some
Yes.
people want to work, That's why nobody's
Well,
happy, man.
I will say this. I think that if Twitch drops didn't count for your grind, and if they weren't giving out compensation for messing up the scrolls and all of that stuff, right? Like in the future, I think this game mode could be like very disliked based on the grind, because I think a lot of it is supplemented by those decisions that they made, which I consider like things that I would not count on happening next time. And so when I look at that stuff, I think, oh, okay, so next time this is actually going to be a legit grind, and it's probably going to be really, really hard for someone like me who doesn't really want to engage in it, right? And so that is the kind of thing where it's like right now I think Sanctum is great because I didn't really have to engage in the intended mechanics of the mode. But in a world where I have to engage in the intended grind of the mode, I think what I would be calling for is like a couple more ranks a couple more sorcerer ranks at like reasonable spaces in order to make up for like what we're losing here. And that would be the kind of thing where it's like, all right, if I just like play my games and like get somewhere with this, I will feel good about having played this mode. Where if they keep it the exact same, I think that could cause some real backlash. Similar to, you remember when Deadpool's Diner 2 came out and they basically changed nothing, and everyone just sort of was like, well, this just got worse. The reward is worse and nothing got better. And so this is a situation where I think Sanctum 2 could actually be pretty poorly received, thanks to how high expectations were for Sanctum 1, if they don't do a little bit of easing on in terms of like giving us just a little bit more easy to acquire breakpoints.
On that note, do you think they'll actually do Sanctum 2? Because they kind of did this thing, right? They did Deadpool 1, Deadpool 2. Do you think they're going to do Sanctum 2?
Yeah, I do. I mean, they're doing like High Voltage 3 this month. Like, I think that as long as a mode is a success, they'll run it again just to like find a way to disseminate the King A trees of the world because no one's going to pay for them. OTA hopes. So this is where I talk about how much I deeply wish they would nerf Hela normally. But this is where I'm actually going to talk about how much I don't think they should nerf Agamotto and Eson. One thing that has been bugging me recently is how quick the Marvel Snap community is to call something busted, especially if that something is the season pass card. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I don't think Sam Wilson is incredibly strong. But I will say that it really does matter contextually, because Sam Wilson in the last 2 weeks went from being the best card in the game to a snap condition when you see your opponent is playing it to the best card in the game again. It is entirely contextual. This is not a thing that is like absolute. And I think people really don't understand that like when we talk about this stuff, it is all relative to everything else that is happening. What other people are playing. Because Sam Wilson is the best card in these mid-range metagames. But the second we leave a mid-range metagame and all of your opponents are playing Hela and Mr. Negative, they are snapping when they realize you are a Sam Wilson deck, which is very early. And that dynamic is really unique and interesting. That's not to say that Sam Wilson isn't good. He's obviously great. We know that. But there's context in which he's bad. And I think that that is an important lesson for people to learn, that like calling something busted 3 days after it comes out, I think is basically always going to be a mistake, even if you end up being right 6 weeks later. You know what I mean? Like, you might have been right 6 weeks later, but that you were wrong 3 days in, because it's just not the kind of thing you can know a lot of the time. It's very, very difficult.
Yeah, so based on that, actually, I really agree as well. My OTA hope is not really just an OTA hope. It's like hope that the OTA doesn't do anything too crazy to Agamotto. Because, like, I've seen so many Agamotto lists. The one that like most of us like and think is the best right now might not actually end up being the best, because this card really needs time to cook. this card feels like no one is really, I won't say no one, not many people are exploring its full spectrum of abilities here. Like we just gravitated to the what looks obviously good, which is like the Galacta and the Gwenpool thing, but like we mentioned in the entire episode, I think this needs a little bit more time to cook. There might be more combo oriented things you can do with Agamotto as well, which we haven't explored right now. I off the top of my head, I just suddenly thought of the card Magic with Agamotto. I don't know what I want to do with Magic, but I thought of Magic and the extra turn, and I feel like having these extra cards to be able to do more stuff with Magic could be a thing as well.
Talking a little bit more about context, right? Like, one thing that I'm seeing a lot of people do is go, I'm going to counter Agamotto by playing Gorgon and Cassandra Nova. And I don't think that works for a variety of reasons. The first is Gorgon, like, okay, it matters some of the time, but it's not, like, actually that impactful. Like, it's cool, but also you were already imaging on 5. Like, that was already the time when you wanted to do that most of the time. You were already probably playing the 1-drop on 1 before Gorgon comes down, and the other 2 are not really, like, core to the game plan in the same way. Or alternatively, like, if you're not imaging on 5, you're still able to bolts on 5, even if it costs 4. Yep. And a lot of Agamotto decks are playing Quinjet, which means that Gorgon isn't, they're just like offsetting that entirely. And so you're just sitting there like, is this actually helping me at all? Cassandra Nova looks like a card that would work, but she doesn't take points of power off of cards that have no power. So it's not like you'll play her and they have 10 cards in the deck and she's a 3/10. You'll play her and they'll have 10 cards in the deck. It'll be 10 minus whatever amount of spells they have. And so it's like, oh, okay, she's not all that good either, but the card that is actually good against Agamotto is Darkhawk. Like, that card is actually getting +8 in every matchup against an Agamotto deck. It's dominating Arishem decks, it's dominating Thanos decks. It's actually doing that, right? And so I think that the question I have is, what is the best Darkhawk lists for people who are trying to beat this stuff?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you or ask everyone that question as well, because I know this is the Darkhawk topic, but I want to be the Darkhawk pessimist right now. Okay. Because personally, yeah, I do get it, right? You get like about an average +8 on the Darkhawk, but Darkhawk just feels so 2024. It's just like you get to play it. Yeah, it's big. It definitely beats Arishem with the Cassandra Nova that might or might not be in the deck for the list, but I feel like it's very cope, like Agamotto just like, yeah, I guess once in a while you play rocks into the deck and then they draw their good cards less likely and all that kind of thing. But really just feels like slamming a Darkhawk is just not enough. Like, my personal opinion is it does get bigger. The Darkhawk is a threat. Yes, you win one location, but it just feels not enough. Like, what are the builds that make this Darkhawk deck able to contest with the ability for Agamotto decks to be so flexible in where it allocates its points? Like Agamotto has a lot of like movement related cards involved as well. Also, like, it's just a very flexible deck, and I feel like Darkhawk just slam one big guy, hope it works out on one location. So yeah, I'm actually quite pessimistic on whether Darkhawk is enough.
There is something of that in the Darkhawk deck. Like, people are playing like this, in my opinion, fairly mediocre Darkhawk Ronin deck right now. And every time they play that against my Agamotto deck, it's like, all right, cool disruption. I appreciate that. You play your final turns are a turn 5 5-drop and then a turn 6 5-drop. And it's like, well, I'm just going to Shang-Chi you.
Yeah, exactly.
Good job.
It's not even so 2024. It's actually so 2023, whereby Shang-Chi on big guy equals lose, right? Like, in the current like Marvel Snap like era, Shang-Chi on big guys shouldn't be just straight up you lose the game. There's bound to be more things you can allocate here and there, which is what Agamotto is doing, right? You allocate stuff in many different places.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of 8 Cubes, watching it on YouTube. I'm thinking I'm going to just start putting these up on Spotify as well. It's been a while, but I think we've sort of fallen into a pattern of like, we do my episode and then I'm like, oh, we'll do Lamby's episode, and then we don't do Lamby's episode. And I figure if we're just doing my episodes, I might as well just put them all up there because I have all the audio for that. So you'll be able to start seeing these on Spotify. It'll be like under the old 8 Cubes feed if any of y'all are still subscribed. I haven't uploaded anything there in forever because of these scheduling things, but they will be back on Spotify, so make sure you check that out. Thank you so much. I've been KMBest. He's been Lamby Series, and he's going to take us out.
All right, guys. Once again, like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.